I'm Kate Bayuk, for those of you who don't know me. I'd like to really thank all of you for sacrificing an hour on a Saturday in the middle of the day to come out for this. I know there are a lot of questions about it. I know there's a lot of concern. I also know there's a lot of support. Teresa is going to be recording. We don't know if we're going to use it. If this turns out well and it's a good discussion, we may try to post it online so people can access it. And I may decide to do another one of these presentations in a week or so on a weeknight evening when maybe more people could attend or not. So again, thank you for coming. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm a lawyer. I've lived in Bolton for 12 years. I grow recreational marijuana at this point for my husband, who uses it medically. And that's how I first became involved. I don't use it. I don't like it. It's not my thing, but it's very beneficial to my husband. So what we're looking to do is pass a bylaw at town meeting that would allow for very small-scale cultivation of recreational marijuana in Bolton. As everybody knows, it is legal recreationally in the state of Massachusetts right now. The state has put together a set of 88 pages of regulations that is governing this new industry. Just a couple of weeks ago, they started accepting applications for cultivators, retailers, manufacturers, and testing laboratories. The application process right now is limited to priority applicants. Those are existing medical dispensaries, and they are certain areas that have been adversely impacted by the war on drugs, and it's had adverse socioeconomic impact. So those are the people who are applying right now. The last I heard, there were 200 applications in some form of completion that had already been submitted. Regular people, which is people who are new to the industry or who are not in these economic empowerment zones, can start submitting applications within the next couple of weeks. A lot of towns in Massachusetts are sort of where Bolton is right now. They're wrestling with this. They've got issues coming up at town meetings. Planning boards and boards of selectmen are talking about it. Citizens like me are putting forth petitions. So depending on what we do at town meeting will depend on exactly where Bolton falls with regard to the marijuana industry. When we had the vote a couple of years ago, Bolton supported legalizing recreational marijuana. So Bolton is not permitted to ban any of the industries unless it takes another town vote, which I'm not speaking for any of the town boards, I'm not on them, but there is no warrant article to prohibit the industry in Bolton. So the planning board has one article that they're putting forward, which essentially would relegate the marijuana industry to the industrial zone. My personal view is that it really encourages large-scale industry. Marijuana industry, which is not my thing, that's not my interest. I'm not even necessarily sure I'd like to see it in the town. But the planning board article does not discuss small-scale cultivation. So unless we pass a bylaw, it's not going to be permitted. So let's, Cindy's going to be kind enough to help me with the slide presentation. So I'd like to start with some fact versus fiction. Okay, the next one. Again. Yeah. Okay. Pot farms everywhere. So that's not going to be the case. The state regulations have 11 tiers of the size of cultivation. The smallest tier is tier 1, and that's up to 5,000 square feet of cultivation space. Something on the order of the size of this floor of this library. The bylaw that I'm putting forward limits it to 1,000 square feet. There are not going to be a lot of people who are going to be interested in doing such a small-scale operation. It requires an extensive knowledge of marijuana cultivation, dedication, compliance with 88 pages of regulations that we're going to talk about, and a really significant financial investment. So the people who are going to be doing this are dedicated. They're going to be people who are here and have roots in this community. This is not going to be everybody on your block opening up a 1,000-square cultivation. Most people simply can't and don't want to do it. Next. This is not going to make it easier for our kids to get pot. This is talking about cultivation. This is wholesale sale to retail operations, which, as far as I know, there are none currently slated in the town. If there are, I believe they'll end up in the industrial zone. But what I'm talking about doing is just growing it wholesale and selling it to other licensed establishments that have adhered to the same 88 pages of regulations that I have. The state law does limit marijuana to people who are over 21 years of age to begin with. If kids are doing pot, they're getting it illegally. They're not getting it through legal channels. Next. You're not going to smell it in your backyard. The way that I wrote the bylaw was I took some of the language from the planning board's article that said you can't smell it on adjoining properties. I think that's fair, I think that's reasonable, and it's doable. Anyone who's growing indoors can use charcoal filters or any number of things that limit and eliminate the smell. Anybody who wants to grow it outdoors, personally, I wouldn't do it. I think it would be difficult and expensive to set up a 1,000 square foot grow area to get one harvest a year. But I don't want to limit anyone else who has a lot more acreage than I have, or farmers who may want to do this. If they have the space and they can do it without their neighbors smelling it, then that would be fine under this bylaw. Next. There is not going to be an increase in crime rates. We'll talk in detail about the security measures that are required. This is designed to be invisible, to be not smellable. The security measures require approval by our local Bolton Chief of Police before you can even get your application into the state. So there's plenty of security that will prevent this.
Okay, I have a question. How, if someone wanted to grow it outside and it was approved, how do you prevent the smell from, what's the process? And then what do you do if there is a problem and this is a bylaw?
Right, so I am not well versed at all in growing outside. I haven't done it. In terms of odor control, I frankly don't know how you do odor control for outdoor grows. I think that if you're on a small plot of land, you're automatically not going to be able to do this because the smell is going to be apparent to your neighbors.
But it's not written that way.
It is, because if the bylaw is written to say that you can't do it if you can smell it from adjoining properties. And then it would be a nuisance, which would be governed by regular nuisance laws in the town of Bolton.
But if it's if you have to go to the state, if this is passed, then the neighbor would have to go to the state.
I think the neighbor could also go to the town because it would be a public nuisance.
If it's a town bylaw.
I can't even get the dogs to stop barking next door. I just find it would be really difficult.
I have a question too, because the bylaw, the way it's proposed, it says it cannot be detected from an adjoining property by a person with normal sense of smell. How do we define normal?
Okay, so I took that language directly from the planning board's bylaw, which they are putting forward at town meeting. So that is a standard that they put in, and I carried it over into this bylaw.
Because the reason I'm asking is I read the regulations, and the regulations do not specifically say eliminate the smell. They say reduce the smell. So there's always the potential for smell.
Well, so what this bylaw says is that a person of normal smell can't smell it from an adjoining property. So that's the way that I've drafted it, and that's the same as the planning board's article that they're putting forward as well with regard to the industrial zone.
Yeah, well, normal to me might be something else somebody else. So I think this is vague, it's not specific. Maybe that allows it permits for others.
Okay. All right, so next.
I would like to know if you have been in touch with the chief of police
I'm
so
sorry?
far? Have you been in touch with the chief of police so far, and how do you think that would go?
I have not personally spoken with the chief. Teresa, who is the head of our AgCom, has, so I'll let her indicate what her discussions have been.
So you want me to do that?
Sure.
So the chief said that he was waiting for the state of Massachusetts police to sort of come down, you know, once this was finalized with any issues they had around the subject. So he didn't comment directly on the fact that marijuana is legal and what that means.
You mean
But-
once the bylaw is finalized?
No.
Is that what this is?
Well, for recreational in general.
There will be guidance coming down to the chiefs of police from the municipal associations, I believe, in terms of, you know, kind of an overarching policy.
As far as this bylaw directly, it does require, the state requires a review by the chief of police around their security measures, and he didn't see that. He said that up to 10 places could try to do this and it wouldn't affect his staffing or his hours. And so he didn't see anything directly changing what his job is in general. So,
But I thought you said he didn't comment because he was waiting for an answer. So he did comment that nothing would change?
on the general fact that marijuana is now recreational and the planning board's article that we're going to vote on, in general, he didn't comment. But specifically on this one, where it requires him to overview the security measures, he felt whether there was 1 or 10, it wouldn't make a difference to his workday.
Well, it's-
So he hasn't commented substantively on what he thinks the security should look like. But we know that this is legal in Massachusetts medically already. We know that this is legal all over the country and a lot of other states recreationally and medically. And the security industry that has built up around marijuana establishments is pretty well established. And we'll talk in a little bit about what some of the details of the security plan will be. So those are the things that the chief will be reviewing when I give him a plan. And he's going to say, do you have these things? Do you have that thing? And we'll make comments, I would assume, on whether he thinks there are improvements or there are things that are not necessary. But I don't want to speak for the chief of police.
Let me ask this, I mean, you say no increasing crime rates. No, I mean, how do you have any idea to say that? I mean, you have no way of knowing that, right?
Well, what I can say
I
is
mean, you
that
can
this
say,
is-
okay, we'll have more security, or people like road will have security, but of course you're gonna increase crime rates. I mean, you're opening up the town to something that is gonna,
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
Well, I think that's a jaded view of it to say that it's inevitable.
Well, I think
In
it's.
fact, if you look in Colorado, they have seen no increase in
Oregon
crime
too.
rates.
They've actually seen a 1% drop in their crime rate. since
So
they
I
enacted
do
it.
want to I do know there's a lot of potential to go off the rails in a lot of directions. So I do want to try to stick to my script a little bit. We're going to have a lot of discussion about security later, but I do want to try to keep this within an hour. So as I go through the slides, if there are really specific questions that I can give you sort of detailed information to give you more information, I'd like to do that. Sort of this more generalized discussion, I'd like to save for the end, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question because you already brought up the issue of 1,000 square feet.
Yes,
That refers to canopy, not everything.
that's
And
correct.
the facilities will have.
Yeah, I would like,
tires.
again, I'd like to keep it a little bit more on the way that I have this laid out, because we're going to discuss
So
that.
we'll discuss that.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of revenue to the town, whatever I may be successful in pulling in terms of revenue, 3% of that off the top would go to the town as a community impact fee. It's negotiated in the host community agreement that we'll talk about later, but that's off the top. It's before I pay electricity, it's before I pay for supplies, it's not net profit, it's not any, it's net gross revenue, 3% to the town. Next. So our master plan promotes agriculture and home businesses. This does both. Next. So we've already talked a little bit about the 88 pages of regulations. If anybody is really bored and wants to go through them, I have them with me. And we'll talk in a lot of detail about this. The regulations apply to transportation, hygiene, inventory, testing, diversion prevention, employee training and hiring, visibility, marketing, labeling, packaging, and a whole lot of other things. So this is not just sort of a fly-by-night operation. This is really highly regulated. Next. We already discussed this is not about retail sales in the town of Bolton. This is wholesale production for sale to retail establishments that are also licensed. Next. So 1,000 square feet of canopy, very limited space. Next. So this will give some employment opportunities in the town of Bolton. It's a good opportunity for mom and pops. It's a good opportunity for our local farms in the event that they decide that they want to take advantage of this. So next, we're going to get into a little bit more of the substance. Yep.
I just have a quick question. You say employment. I know people under 21 can't sell alcohol. Can people under 21 work for
No,
you?
ma'am, they cannot. They cannot work. They cannot
Can't be on the
volunteer. They
premises.
cannot come into any of the limited access areas. Okay, so.
Kate, I'm sorry, just go back just to the 1,000 square feet.
Yep.
Once this is established, you have the right to then apply to the state for more square footage.
Not under this Bolton bylaw. It limits it permanently to 1,000 square feet.
I don't think it does. And that's something I'm gonna, I would like to get input from an attorney, but it doesn't specifically exclude expansion according to 935 CMR 550C.
Okay, I disagree with you. I think it does. So let me give you a little bit of background if you're not familiar with general marijuana cultivation. So the regulations and the planning board's bylaw and my bylaw all refer to canopy. That's the mature plant that's in flower. The life cycle of a marijuana plant basically is you either have it from seed or clone, you keep it in a vegetative state for a couple of months, and then you switch it to flower for a couple of months. So what canopy is it's that last stage. So this is 1,000 square feet of flowering marijuana at any one time. The way that the state defines it is that it includes all square footage in your canopy area. So if we were using this room, you would need walkways, you would need to be able to access your plants. That otherwise dead space is included in canopy. Okay, so you can cram any number of plants into 1,000 square feet, but you cannot successfully grow that number.
But again, it doesn't include everything else for this type of facility, such as packaging area.
Right,
shipping,
so let me
receiving.
talk about that. So the other things that go along with marijuana cultivation are you need your vegetative area where your smaller plants and your clones are growing. So you need a little bit less space than, well, significantly less space than 1,000 square feet for that. You need storage space. You need a space to harvest and dry and trim and cure your plants. So that is not included within the canopy area. The canopy area is specifically the number of flowering plants. And my bylaw does not address how large or small the other areas can be. Yes, ma'am?
Say, a good cultivator, what percentage of their plants in all of those seed, infancy, whatever, would be in flower at any given time?
Well, the idea would be to have your flowering room full at all times. So that's basically it depends
Is that like
on the strength.
a third of the plants might be in flower at any given time?
Probably about a third to half would be in flower at any given time. Okay, so marijuana cultivator is a licensed is a definition under the regulations. So we're talking about cultivating, processing, and packaging, and possibly transferring marijuana to other establishments. But none of this is going to consumers directly from the cultivator. That's a separate license. They have their own set of regulations that they have to adhere to for retail sales. Next. So now we're going to get into the regulations themselves, and I've gone sequentially through them, and I am selective in terms of what I'm talking about. I'm only talking about stuff that's related to cultivation. I'm not talking about testing, I'm not talking about manufacturing, which would be shifting it into an edible or some other format, sprays, tinctures, I'm not talking about that. And I am not talking about retail sales. So anyone, when you start the application process and when you open your business, the owners, managers, employees, and anyone who volunteers has to register with the state. They have to get approved, they have to have a criminal background check, they have to have a query check, they have to get their license annually reviewed, and you have to pay a fee. So that's anybody who comes into contact. Next. So this is what cultivation talks about. We already talked about it doesn't go to consumers. The state has 11 tiers that they've set up. The Bolton bylaw is smaller than Tier 1. It would technically be a Tier 1 license, but instead of being allowed to grow the 5,000 square feet, the Tier 1 under the state regulations, the Bolton petition would limit it to 1,000 square feet of canopy. So when the state set out their draft regulations in December, they had Tier 1 as 1,000 square feet, which was sort of where my inspiration came from. And I think that's a pretty reasonable amount of space. I don't think it's a large operation. So I did not increase it to 5,000 square feet because I think that's too much. I think 1,000 square feet is much more reasonable. Any questions on this in terms of the requirements for the people who would work?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm a little bit late, I'm sorry. The 1,000 square feet, only a 50-foot buffer. Who determines that?
Who determines, I'm sorry, which part?
The 1,000 square feet, only a 50-foot buffer. Who came up with that number?
So the 50-foot buffer is, I came up with 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, but what is that based on?
It's based on how much space it's based on what I think that I would be able to run a profitable business at, without being too overwhelming to the residential district.
But is that something that is standard in other towns, whatever, or is it higher, lower?
This is much lower than anything that I've seen in any other towns. Okay, next. Do you know how to make that noise stop, Teresa?
I wish I did.
Okay. All right, so this is a picture of what a 2,000 square foot flower room looks like. I couldn't find one that was only 1,000 square feet. So you can see that what I'm proposing would be half of this size in flower.
Hey, have other towns, have they passed this law with 50-foot buffer in Massachusetts that you know of?
I don't know. I know that the 50-foot buffer is in the planning board's main article.
Yeah, but the planning board, that doesn't mean anything to me because they haven't gotten the feedback, there hasn't been time to do that.
Okay, well, I'm talking about on their main bylaw.
Right, but there's no one else, no other town in Massachusetts that's done this.
I can't say that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to
I
that.
thought the other town bylaw is complying with state requirements of 500 square feet.
Yeah, it is.
No, this is the setback. You're asking about setbacks, the 50-foot setbacks. That's different than the planning board bylaw that talks about not within 500 feet of residence.
But the 50-foot setback, I thought was from public ways?
No, I believe that the setbacks are the exact same. So that's for the building or wherever anybody was going to grow it, the setbacks from your property lines.
I don't quite understand. You're saying with a 50-foot buffer, that if this is my property zone, that building can be 50 feet from my yard?
That's right.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Way my barn could be.
Right,
Right next door.
But that's not the barn.
Yes.
I'm wondering with these stipulations,
I'm sorry.
I'm wondering with these stipulations, who would have the role of measuring, enforcing, and keeping the books, the paperwork related to these new businesses? Would that be an additional employee of the town? Would that be someone already at the town that would take on additional responsibility? How would that be handled, do you see?
Okay, so in order to get your license, you have to have all of your plans drawn up, and they have to get approved by the state, so you're showing them your drawings for the space that you're going to carve out. And the way that I've drafted the bylaw is that you still have to comply with all of the Bolton building codes, Board of Health regulations, those sorts of things. So if somebody is doing an alteration to their property that would have to get a building permit, you have to go to the building inspector, you have to get your permit, you have to have plans and go through the regular process. If you want to put up a brand new barn or a greenhouse, you have to go through the local building codes to be able to do all of that. So that would be, just like anybody else who wanted to put up a barn would have to comply with those same requirements.
But according to the proposed article, it says that we would like, it's proposing that special permit procedures would be inapplicable. So these facilities would not have to go through the special permit zoning requirements.
That's correct. It would not need to go through the special permit process at the planning board. It would have to go through all of the regular building code that you go through with the building inspector, the Board of Health, Cultivation Commission, and all the other committees that you have to go in front of if you want to do any kind of new building.
But if building aside, if you had issues, you'd have to go to the state, the way that this is written.
No.
Well, no, because you would have complied with the building code.
No, but if your neighbor, I think that's your question, what you were asking.
That, for example, there are orders associated with these facilities, or we have issues with lighting, etc. If we are passing all these special permit zoning requirements at the town level, then we're going to have to go to the state level, because...
So this is something that I already talked about. You could go to the town with regard to any other type of nuisance, the way you would with any type of nuisance. Okay, next. Okay, so before you can get up and running, you need to apply and get approved by the state. And there are 3 phases of application: application of intent, the background check package, and the management and operations profile. Next. So here's the application of intent. You need to disclose all of the owners and managers, their ownership interests. You have to give financial documentation from the sources of your capital contributions so that they can see that this is not coming from ill-gotten gains. You have to have your proposed location and documentation of a property interest. So either you own the property, you have a lease, or you have somebody who has agreed to lease to you if you're successful. So this is something that I think is particularly important, is the community host agreement. That's something that any applicant has to go and negotiate with their local town before you can apply for a state license. That means going before the Board of Selectmen and getting a host agreement that, first of all, will set the community impact fee, which, as I said, can be 3% of your gross proceeds. And there are a lot of things that could be negotiated in a host community agreement. Somebody who anticipated having a good amount of profits might make other concessions to the town that they might be willing to provide. The selectmen could negotiate for any number of things in the community host agreement. I've seen some that are being kicked around as kind of preliminary drafts. It's brand new, nobody is up and running yet, and anything that I found online has been draft agreements. But it talks about how the town would get its 3%, what documents I would need to provide, what financial documents I would need to provide to the town, and when to document my sales so that they're sure that they're getting the right amount of money. Talking about how applicants will interact with their local police departments, updating them with regard to information. So there are a lot of things that can go into the host community agreement that gives oversight to the town. So the other thing that I think is important to note is, and this goes kind of hand in hand with the concern about the bylaw not requiring a special permit process. The state application requires a community outreach meeting, which basically is a lot like a public hearing. You have to publish notice in the newspaper. You have to give notice to the town entities, the clerk, the planning board. You have to give notice to your abutters, and there's a list of information that you have to tell the state that you've done. You have to tell the state that you've disclosed the type of establishment, that you've disclosed to the people at the meeting that the establishment will be secure and how that's going to be achieved, what your prevention of diversion of product to minors plan is, that you have to tell your local community your plan to have a positive impact on the community. You need to establish that your location is not going to be a nuisance. And you need to certify that the community members who attended were able to ask questions and get them answered. And as we've talked about a little bit, you have to demonstrate compliance with your local codes and bylaws. So if this bylaw that I'm proposing passes, then I need to tell the state I've complied with this just over 2-page bylaw about residential growing in Bolton, as well as the local codes. That's building code, Board of Health, those sorts of things. Questions on this? Yes?
I don't see anything in the proposal that addresses preserving neighborhood character. And I understand that a lot of growers grow indoors. And I'll tell you what I'm picturing. Where I live on a pretty rural street, and apple orchards and farms and corn look beautiful. They're not fenced or lighted at night. I wouldn't want a car wash next door to me. And I'm just picturing these big corrugated metal buildings with parking lots and 24/7 lights. I'm not picturing a barn. So can you tell me why there's nothing in here about preserving neighborhood character and what it would look like?
Right, so, in terms of, I'm not sure what you mean by that kind of corrugated metal.
Well, a big metal structure, people can just go and get a metal structure. And the photo you showed us of the growing room, that looked to be in a metal building, not an old wooden red barn. And so I'm just trying to picture what it would look like to have a great big square, industrial style building in my residential neighborhood. And have you considered putting some protections or something? Communities that retain their rural beauty don't do it by accident. They do it by proactively saying, we want to look a certain way to preserve this character. And I just don't see anything about that in here.
Okay, so in terms of, if somebody was going to outfit their basement, I don't think that's going to change the character of any existing house in Bolton.
Sure.
And, in terms of somebody putting up a greenhouse, I think that would also probably be consistent if they wanted to do a greenhouse. If somebody went, I honestly can't say that the building inspector would approve that sort of plan. I don't know if somebody wanted to go put up a big metal structure on their property. But, I really think that this is the type of thing that people are going to do in existing structures or in an accessory use. Putting up a metal corrugated shed is not going to be conducive to growing the plants. You need very special climate control and that sort of thing. So I don't think some sort of metal industrial sort of.
But greenhouses are that polypropylene, like a plastic kind of thing. What would be are you familiar with state security requirements? Because you can cut through the plastic with a penknife, and do they require fencing of 6 feet, or do you know what the requirements
I do, and we'll talk
might be?
about the security requirements
Okay.
A little bit later.
Can I say one thing too? I live on Quaker, so we don't have any rules on Quaker, but I know the newer developments like Fox Run and over on Sugar Road, they have really strict guidelines anyway that I think people have to sign to move in there. Like I've heard people have been approached because they don't have the right kind of furniture on their front porch. You're not allowed to have clotheslines. You're not allowed to have sheds. So those neighborhoods would automatically be protected, right? Because they already have even stricter rules.
But we don't know that for sure. We don't know that for sure because we are bypassing all our bylaws that are associated with special permit. And these facilities, probably Kate will talk to us about more, they're industrial in nature. I mean, they require an HVAC system, they require cameras, and all these sort of things that me as a neighbor, I have to be concerned about. We're gonna have shipping, receiving, so now next door to me.
No,
Okay.
there's no shipping and receiving.
Not with 1,000 square feet.
Of course you do.
No, you're not.
It's
No,
not
you're
that
not.
big.
It's not that big of an operation.
You know, if you're talking about a large industrial grow, I would agree with you. You would have a big shipping and receiving, and that sort of 1,000 square feet is not that
Well,
much,
for
that
any
many
kind of
plants.
tier, according to the law, because to the regulations, because I read all of them, these are all part of the requirements. And sometimes we may bring plants, or they will come and ship the plants out. This is shipping, receiving. You're gonna have some kind of traffic.
You're not
No.
gonna produce that much product in that size of
We don't know
space.
that. We don't know
No,
that.
you do know
You
that
do
based
know
on
that.
it being
It's
1,000
you're
square
limited to
feet.
space.
If you're talking about a larger operation, then you would have these issues. The reason that I've done it at 1,000 square feet is that it's not going to have an impact of huge trucks coming and going at all hours in the day and night.
Well,
That's
we
not
don't-
the way this is designed to work.
Yeah, but we haven't seen an assessment. I mean, this is based on rhetoric and opinion. Unless we see some data from other towns that have done this, or from other areas, or from Colorado, and we actually see the data, I'm not convinced. I need to see the data to see how we can support.
All right,
this.
well, I can tell you what, from my experience, what it would be, what it would look like, based on my experience of growing a small number of plants, what the impact would be for 1,000 square feet. If you want to look at some of the larger scale industrial things, that's a different model, and I'm not here to talk about that today.
Can you just
Next.
describe what it would be then for 1,000 square feet? What would that look like?
Sure, so for 1,000 square feet, I would buy bags of soil that I would transport in the back of my car.
I want that.
Can I take a look? Great.
I think it's a bigger problem, so.
That would be bad.
Excuse me, while you're waiting for them, on average, how many farms are?
Well,
gonna-
just let her
Yeah, I wanna
finish that,
yeah.
answer to that question. I'm just curious what that would.
Okay.
the-
So I would need to bring soil. I would need to get fertilizer. And these are all things that I would transport in my existing vehicles. In terms of seeds or clones, I would get seeds by mail, or I would make clones myself from existing plants.
Yeah.
In terms, and we'll talk about the transportation in a little bit. There's special rules about transportation. What I would be looking at is each harvest having a maximum of probably about 40 pounds. That's not a whole lot to transport in a secure vehicle. You know, that's not a big box truck that, you know, the transportation regulations require that it be an unmarked vehicle, that it be secured in a welded-in secure part of the vehicle. So, you know, you're talking about one car 4, 5, 6 times a year coming to pick up and move the finished product. So, you know, you're not talking about extra parking, you're not talking about, in my case, you're certainly not talking about employee parking. At best, I would have one part-time person coming in to help me during harvest and during trimming and curing. You know, so it's not going to produce lots of more traffic. It's not going to, you're not going to have those kinds of big industrial effects that you would have if you put this in a column and had 50,000 square feet of grow space.
But still though, back to kind of her point, I mean, you don't know what other people are gonna do with the building, right? They can get a metal building, I mean, besides Box Run, most places aren't gonna have restrictions on what you what your neighbor does.
But the town of Bolton itself has restrictions on what you're allowed to build and where you're allowed to build it. So if there's a, you're, if
But,
you're, regardless of this, there's
But
restrictions.
I don't know, there's restrictions for building something for
Shed.
1,000 square shed.
There are.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Some are.
Yeah.
You have to get a permit to put a shed on your property.
And
But
you
this-
have
but
to
if-
demonstrate
if-
to the
if this-
state
if
that
this-
you've complied with your
Yeah, but
local
if this
building code.
passes and people can grow, then
They're still
why
gonna
would,
have
why
to-
would they be able to get a permit to do it?
I think the bottom
I
line
mean-
is for you, Kate, we totally trust you'll do the right thing and you'll be very conscientious grower. And I don't doubt that at all. The question is that if this passes, anybody here could come and be able to do a tier 1 cultivation facility.
Right, and I agree with
And if
you.
that's
And
not-
I
right, and that-
appreciate that you're looking at it from the way I would approach it. And I would suggest to you that other people who are going to do just 1,000 square feet, there aren't a lot of us. There
Yes,
are
small.
not a lot of people who are going to put this time and money and dedication into doing 1,000 square feet. If they're going to put this time, money, and dedication in, they're going to cob them in a 50,000-foot facility.
But we do not know that. So
Right.
the bottom line is if this bylaw passes, this is an opportunity for whoever wants to move to Bolton, to get it, and do it.
It's bylaws putting restrictions on people that do it.
Okay,
But
so
the
I
other
think
thing
we-
is the building code is, you have to get a permit to put a building on your property, right?
Well,
So the town
sure.
has bylaws already set up for the building code. So you're talking about a corrugated shed. If I go to the town and say, I want to put on this big corrugated shed,
From a
town's gonna say to me,
motorcycle.
town's gonna say to me, sorry, that doesn't fit in our bylaws. because
Depending
the
on
by-
what size though.
Depending on what size,
Because our little barn is just under, so
it's,
that we
but
didn't
it's a
have to-
barn. It's, what's it made out of?
Well,
So
it's made out of
you
wood.
still needed to get a permit to put it up by the town.
10 by 12. Anything
10
10
by
by
12.
12.
Okay, let's
Anything
go
bigger than
ahead.
10 by
I think we
12,
understand
you
what
have
the
to get a
concern
permit.
is, and I think we
By the
understand
bylaw.
what some of the parameters that we're working within is. So let's move on. Yes, please.
We did.
Okay, so this is the background check component of the application package. This is a little bit different than all of your other employees and volunteers, if you're going to have them. This is just the initial application. You have to have all the owners, managers, and investors have background checks. They have to be fingerprinted. You have to have a Corey check, just like you do if you go into one of our schools. And you have to disclose any kinds of criminal, civil, or administrative proceedings against you. Yes, ma'am?
So is that just getting the information, or does that information then potentially disqualify someone?
That, the state will disqualify you based on their review of it if you don't meet their standards. And there are categories of people that I cannot quote chapter and verse who simply cannot be a part of this. Certain criminal convictions for, drug offenses, and there's a list of them that I can't recite off the top of my head, but, your convicted drug dealers who've been slinging guns for the past 20 years aren't doing this because the state's not going to give them a license. Next. Okay, so this is, to me, the overwhelming part. As part of the application, before you can get approved, you have to tell the state everything that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. You have to have a timeline and be able to demonstrate to the state that you have the ability to meet the timeline. You have to have a liability insurance plan, or a very large amount of money in escrow if you can't get insurance. I believe the number was $250,000 in escrow if you can't carry liability insurance. And you have to have all of these written, detailed policies for security, prevention of diversion, storage, transportation, inventory, quality control and testing, personnel, record keeping, qualification and training for employees. Next. And then for people who are growing it, you also have to tell them how you're going to grow it. You have to tell them what your soil is going to be, what your fertilizers are going to be, what strains you're going to grow, and everything, how you're going to cure it, how you're going to trim it, how you're going to package it. All of that has to be disclosed up front before you get your license.
Kate, is there someone then that monitors those things, or is it just you get your license renewed every year, or?
So we'll go into this as well, but you open your home up to the state at all days and all hours without question, as well as to any emergency responders. Plus, you have to renew your license every single year.
Thank you.
So I have not delved deeply into the renewal procedures. I doubt they're quite as cumbersome. I don't think you probably have to give them all this information. You probably have to update anything that's changed.
And I think they allow unannounced inspections.
Correct, any time of the day or night. Next. So this is the written operational requirements that you have to disclose to the state. If you picked up one of the handouts, this is what's on the backside of the fact versus fiction sheet. I'm not going to go over all of it. The point is to show how extensive the operation requirements are. Next. So these are some more operational requirements. Some things that you might not know a whole lot about is under inventory control, the seed to sale tracking. That means electronic software that's been developed largely for this industry that tracks your plant from the second it's born until it is purchased by consumers. So that means that you have to pay for the electronic tracking that will take it through every step that it's been through in my operation, the transportation to a retail establishment or a market or a manufacturing facility, and then ultimately into the retail shop and into the consumer's hands. So that gives the state the ability to track each and every single plant, make sure it hasn't been diverted, know exactly where it ended up, and every single person who touched it, because part of the seed to sale tracking also tracks every agent and employee who touches it. So transportation between marijuana establishments, I think that's something you guys might be concerned about and interested in. It could be done by the cultivator or by somebody else who is licensed to transport it. My personal preference would be for somebody else to go through all of this and just pick it up from my house because they're licensed to do it, because it's pretty cumbersome. You need 2 licensed agents. You need to videotape the inventory being weighed and packaged and sent out. It has to be re-inventoried on video at whoever receives it within 8 hours of receipt. Whoever's driving has to use random driving routes and times. There is mandated reporting, just like you would have mandated reporting of, abuse of children. You have mandated reporting of any discrepancies in inventory between beginning and end routes. You need to have a state-approved alarm and GPS system. There may be no markings on the vehicle. No firearms are permitted. And you need to have this welded, locked, removable storage compartment as part of the vehicle. And you need to have access to secure communications, which can be a cell phone. Yes?
It says reporting, is that to the state?
Yes. And also, it would also be to the local police. Next. So there are also requirements for energy efficiency and conservation. Obviously it's a pretty large, if you're growing indoors, it's a pretty large energy and lighting usage, so there are requirements to make sure that you're minimizing your footprint there.
Kate, what's the process for waste removal? Like, does this process cause a lot of waste?
So the cultivation does not cause a lot of waste. Basically what you end up with is stems, leaves, and root balls. And we'll talk about the waste removal, which is pretty cumbersome. It basically gets treated as hazardous waste, so it has to get picked up occasionally. But that's really all that it's generating in terms of waste, because everything else gets used either for manufacturing or for packaging into flour.
Do we have any analysis done in terms of what would be the impact to our well system? Because waste is something that could have impact to our well system. And I know this kind of operations, I mean, I shouldn't say I know thoroughly, I'm learning about it. They require a lot of water, and like you said, there are fertilizers and things like that. I'm reading
Right.
the law talks
Yep.
about toxic waste.
Yep, let's get into
all
that. I have that a little bit further in. Next. So these are the, in fact, here they are. So these are the additional requirements for cultivators. The state regulations say that it must be in a designated area that's not visible from a public space without the use of binoculars, aircraft, or other optical aids. There are pesticide regulations, which are the same as would apply to any other agricultural pursuit in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Soil standards are set by the commission. Organic labeling, for anybody who's crazy enough to want to go for that, is the same as it is under any other federal law, so that's pretty difficult. Fertilizer regulations are the same that apply to any other agricultural endeavor in the state. We talked about the energy efficiency requirements. You need to establish your water quality and efficiency. There are no particular requirements on water usage, generally other that wouldn't apply to other agricultural endeavors. Waste management, as I said, there are certain, the leftover stems, leaves, and root balls are treated as hazardous waste, so they need to be specially stored and removed. The HVAC requirements have to comply with all state regulations. And you have to have, we already talked about this a little bit, written policies and procedures about how you're going to cultivate, produce, and distribute your marijuana. This distribution not being an issue.
Kate, I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So we are referring there to public place. It's not visible from a public place. My understanding is that residential areas are not considered public. They are
That's
private
correct.
property. So if I had somebody next to me having an operation like this that is only 50 feet away from my property line, I would be able to see things, including there's going to be ankle cameras, lighting, all these sort of things. And like Tina Yeley told us right now, we live in an area that is so peaceful and tranquil, and it's open fields. So having a facility like this, that's not going to be the same anymore.
Right, so the security we're going to talk about in a little bit as well, but it's not going to be some sort of cumbersome industrial feel of security. Your neighbors already may have exterior cameras. I would imagine most businesses who choose to do this might have exterior cameras. They might be able to do interior only because you need to monitor the entrances, exits, and windows. It doesn't say that you need to do that from the exterior necessarily. You don't have to have like 24-hour lights around your building. Anybody who's growing outside is not going to want 24-hour lights on their plants because that would be bad for them. Next.
One more question.
Yeah.
You're referring to HVAC requirements. HVAC systems are noisy. I work in the pharmaceutical industry and I deal with the FDA and all that. So HVAC systems are quite noisy. So if I have a neighbor next to me, 50 feet away from me, with an HVAC system, that's not going to be great for me.
Well, an HVAC system for 1,000 square feet is only going to have certain requirements. So you're not talking about a large industrial HVAC system.
But still, I mean, we don't know that. We assume. I work for like very small operations, up to 15 people, all the way to 20,000 people. These type of facilities, and I can tell you, the HVAC systems are noisy. The other thing that I was reading in the regulations, you're going to have generators because the plants have to always be warm and all these sort of things. So if you have generators, that's another. Here we have generators for our houses that they make noise. The last storm we had, I could hear them. So you can imagine, even if you had a small operation of 1,000 square feet, what noise that would be. So I'm just asking.
Right, so if everybody in the neighborhood has lost power and is running their generators, yes, anybody who's growing 1,000 square feet would also be running the same generator to prevent loss of their plants. Next.
That would be noisy, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're on the security requirements. Okay, so the security requirements run several pages in the regulations. You need to positively identify anybody who's seeking access to the premises. Some of these are, while they're still required for 1,000 square feet, I don't anticipate having people accessing my premises. But if anybody was coming into any of the limited access areas, you have to positively identify them. You have to prevent loitering, secure all entrances, establish limited access areas, which in my case would mean putting in some new doors in the basement and between my basement and first floor. You need a special vault or safe to store your marijuana in. You have to limit access to keys and passwords. You have to have sufficient lighting for video surveillance. Please note that that does not say 24-hour, 7-day-a-week lighting in the exterior, just enough to do any video surveillance. You need to ensure that all marijuana products are kept out of plain sight and are not visible from a public place without the use of binoculars, optical aids, or aircrafts. And you need to develop emergency policies and share them with local law enforcement authorities and fire services. Next. You may also try to obtain alternate security provisions by seeking some kind of substitute specifically for one of the ones that we talked about that's specifically called out. You need the cannabis control system needs to obtain the local police chief's input if they're going to consider a proposed alternative security. And here are what you're looking at for indoor grows, the very specific requirements. A perimeter alarm, which is windows and doors. A failure notification system so that the owners and managers can be notified if there's a problem with the system. There needs to be a panic alarm connected to the local police. Video cameras in all areas that may contain marijuana. All of your footage needs to be retained for 90 days. You need the ability for your security system to remain operational during a power outage. You need a backup alarm system, limited access to the surveillance areas. The security system needs to be tested every 30 days. And your exterior foliage needs to be maintained to prevent anyone from hiding behind bushes and trees. So that is the indoor requirements. Any questions?
Well, just back to the point that's been made a few times, right? This is not going to be some greenhouse next door, right?
This is
I mean, for all these things somebody's going to need for security, is not going to be some nice greenhouse. It's going to be a building.
I actually have all that on my house. I don't grow marijuana. I have a perimeter alarm.
I'm just saying. Maybe
all that on my house.
On your house. I'm just saying, somebody's not going to put up a greenhouse next door to grow marijuana. It's going to be a significant thing, right?
It's either going to be an existing house, or it's going to be a barn or an outbuilding that complies with the local requirements.
I'm just saying.
But
it's going to change the character of your neighborhood.
It's nothing different than people are putting on their houses currently.
But it's not, no, I disagree. I think it's
disagree
very
with that, too.
different.
It's not different. I mean,
and
you don't have security.
these are industrial requirements. These are the kind of requirements, for example, you find it similar to pharmaceutical industry. These are not, I'm okay, say, with having something like that in a commercial area, but not in a residential area. These are industrial requirements.
I'm not going to get into an argument about it, but the difference in what you're going to see in the exterior of your neighbor's buildings maybe is exterior cameras, which they may or may not already
access to
have.
surveillance area mean? Is that just like one?
So
one
wherever
access?
your surveillance system is set up needs to be its own separate secure area.
Yeah.
So,
So we can't get in and steal it.
so that people can't get in and tamper with the security system. Okay, next. So this is just sort of a picture of, the sort of access that somebody might have inside their, going into their flower room in the basement, or, this would not be on the exterior of the building. This is an interior installation for security, so that you can see all of the areas. So for outdoor, there are slightly different requirements. The area has to be enclosed with a security fence, with commercial grade locks and a monitored security system. So there's also mandated incident reporting, so if you have any kind of incident with regard to your security system, that needs to be reported to the state and to the local police within, I don't remember how many hours, but not a big window. And you need to have an annual independent security audit performed.
Well, but again, like looking at this, I mean, this is not what I have right now next to me. I have open land that looks very tranquil and it's peaceful. Having something like that next to me would not be that. That's not why I moved to Baltimore.
That's not something that you're going to see from your
We
house.
don't know that, Kate. That's the problem. We do not know that.
Sharon?
Are you in a residential area?
Yes.
Well, you can't, anything big has to be in a commercial area, not residential.
But if we're talking,
That's
that's a 10,000 square foot grow.
That photo's a poor example for this,
That's a
this
10,000
venue.
foot grow.
Okay,
Because
this
someone's
aside,
not gonna
what
build
would
a
this-
building
I guess
that
what
big
would
for
a
1,000
security
square
fence
feet.
look like?
Because I think that's what you're trying to say, is the character of the neighborhood.
You're not required a fence by this.
If you're
You
growing
are.
outside.
If you're growing outside.
Right, but isn't
But
that,
if you grow outside, you need a fence. If you grow indoors, you need to have a building like this.
Someone's not gonna build a building like that for 1,000
You do
square
not
feet.
know,
You
you
put it in
do
a
not
basement.
know that.
Way
There-
too
You
small.
do know that
Economically,
if you
can't do it.
understand the economics of what it would cost to do something.
The building's
like
240,000
you
plus
just
the
wouldn't do
property.
it.
But the
For 1,000 square foot.
regulations, it indicates certain requirements that all these growers, 1,000 to, I don't know, whatever the TR 6 or 7 is, have to follow. They don't have different requirements for a small operation versus a large operation. And another concern I have that we can go back to is expansion, because I think there is a loophole about expansion. So that's something I'm digging into finding out more, and I'm gonna ask for legal,
That's fine. You can ask for a legal opinion. The bylaw is written to be limited to 1,000 square feet in the town of Bolton.
But it can be
Residential
outdoors.
period. Yes, it can, but again, we've talked about you can't smell it from an adjoining property. So frankly, anybody who wanted to grow it outdoors is going to need a significant amount of space to be able to do that and to not be able to create a nuisance smell to their neighbors. But we do have some larger properties in Bolton where somebody might be inclined to do that. Okay, I think that's all I want to go through. That kind of hits on all of the basic regulations. I don't want to have a debate at this point about the legality of it, the public policy of it. I would like to answer questions for anybody who has specific questions about the operations and what it would look like for 1,000 square feet in the town. Yes?
A harvest 4 to 5 times a year, 4 to 5, 6 times a year?
So there are different, everybody has their own different method of growing, which can produce a different number of harvests every year. And everybody is growing different strains, which take a different amount of time to harvest. The absolute maximum that I think anybody could cram into a year is 6.5 harvests. That's supremely ambitious. I think more reasonable might be 5. I think most people would be able to do that relatively easily.
With Zen Yoga, 40 pounds-ish.
Right, well, and it depends on your growing technique. I've done some projections, which I think a lot of you have seen, and I guess I should talk about those. So if we crammed 250 plants in, which is the physical maximum density that I think somebody could cram into 1,000 square feet, with no walkways, no room to move, it's really not very realistic. Theoretically, you could generate about $18,000 to the town in community impact fees. That's with 6.5 harvests a year. The number I've used is 4 ounces per plant, which is achievable. relatively easily if you've got a pretty good setup. And that's producing maybe 400 pounds a year. What I think is much more reasonable is a medium density of 175 plants per grow. That would generate about $13,000 to the town. And if you had somebody who did a low density with 125 plants, that's still about $9,000 to the town. These numbers are a little rough because we don't know where the market is going to shake out once everything is legal and there's a brand new wholesale market. So the number I'm using is $1,500 per pound, which is exactly in the middle of the numbers that I'm hearing from other people like myself who are trying to do small-scale cultivation. The benefit to the town, this isn't going to cost the town anything other than a review of the security plan. Yes?
I know I touched on this earlier, but try to describe for me about the plants that are not flowering. If you, in the space requirement, the 1,000 square feet is the flowering canopy.
Correct.
And if you're aiming for 5 or 6 harvests per year, does that mean that you need another 1,000 square feet for the seeds that are starting? Or what would be a reasonable space requirement for the seeds?
So again, this is going to differ based on each individual farmer. Everybody's going to have their own method. Some methods that would be very reasonable would be for somebody to say, I'm just going to have one room where, I'm going to have a seed room for my baby plants, little ones in small cups or very small planters. And then when I'm ready, I am going to put all of them into larger pots in my flower room, and I'm going to grow them in their entire vegetative state and their entire flowering state in that one space. That's going to take 4 months. That's going to have fewer harvests if somebody chooses to do that. So that's one way of doing it. Another way would be to have those small plants in medium-sized pots in a separate room, which would probably be about half the size of the large grow room, so that they're ready to get shipped into the flowering room when you're ready to flip them into flower. So I can tell you exactly what I am planning to do. And at this point in time, my plan is I have 1,000 square feet in my basement. That includes my furnace, it includes my water tank. I don't have 1,000 foot of usable space down there. I have about 750, of which maybe 500 feet would be a flower room, and the rest would be for vegetative state storage processing. That's what I'm looking at. Somebody else might put up a barn that's 1,000 square feet of flower, and 1,000 square feet above that is their vegetative and their processing area. Yes?
Yes, on one of your slides you mentioned the positive benefits to Bolton. Can you hear me? On one of your slides you mentioned the positive benefits to Bolton. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the positive benefits aside from the 3% revenue and part-time 1 employee for you?
Sure. So I would hope that this is successful enough to allow us, my husband and I, to make other contributions to the town. Whether it's contributions to the library or to the schools. So those are the sorts of benefits that I think that I would be able to bring to the town if I'm able to do this.
So for you, the benefits are more on a personal level. You feel your personal contribution would be a positive contribution.
Correct.
To Bolton.
Yes.
So that's what it would be aside from the revenue and aside from employing 1 person part-time.
For me, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So can I also answer that? So I'm Teresa Sauer, I'm the chair of the Agricultural Commission in town. And we've supported this bylaw from the beginning, and in part for just this reason. We see this as an opportunity for the established farms in town, should they need to grow, to diversify into this crop and wanted to, that this opportunity would be there. And so for Bolton, the payoff to the town is that we keep our farms, and we keep them as viable working businesses.
I love the farms here. I see a great benefit to the farms in terms of produce. Most of us benefit from that. But directly, I'm just not seeing how the community would benefit from
this particular product.
No, I understand. I can only speak for the contributions that I would be able to make.
Well, and I
If it can keep farming alive, it might preserve some of the space that we're worried about losing.
well,
And continued produce that they produce, because they're.
And they
in
still
with the-
could continue
right.
to have produce and
'Cause,
sell it at a loss.
yeah, they
you know,
wouldn't
and
make
they're-
enough just to have
Keep them up.
the marijuana, they'd still have to grow their other crops.
okay.
Yes.
Hi, so I came in a little bit late, so if this has been answered, just tell me and I'll catch you afterwards. You've got a state law, and then you've got your proposed bylaw for the town.
Correct.
Could you quickly just bullet, if it's not too long of a list, the differences between, I've heard the statement of if we're gonna default to the state law if we don't put something in. Is that more of the planning board's issue with what they're doing? Does this apply to you at all?
So I can give you kind of a thumbnail sketch,
Great.
which is that the state of Massachusetts has said that marijuana is not right to farm. So unless we have a bylaw that says that residential areas are allowed to farm, then it's not permitted. The planning board has their whole own other bylaw.
So again, because I'm the chair of the AgCom, so Massachusetts, I talked to the Farm Bureau, Massachusetts Farm Bureau, and marijuana is considered an agricultural product in Massachusetts. It is, it can be used for 61A, which is the tax breaks given to farms. It is, however, not, it is excluded from using the zoning bylaws that are allowed to farms.
Thank you.
So, well, back to the point about, I mean, the benefits of this to the town. I know you don't want to be in a debate about legalization of this, but you know, you make a point that it's not good, it's easier, it's not going to be easier for kids to get pot. I mean, come on.
Growing pot compared to apple farms, is that what we want for Bolton? I mean,
Can I just say?
I can't believe that. I mean, is it possible that, you know, I mean, how many people think kids under 21 can't get alcohol? It's very easy, right?
No, it is,
They're gonna be easy,
but-
it's gonna be easier for them to get pot.
But
This
I
makes
have a
common
question.
sense.
It is not because if your kids want pots, and I know because I've lived through this, Clinton, Fitchburg, Leominster, Hudson, your kids can go anywhere. And if
so-
it was me.
And they won't have to go far if we vote it in
Well,
this town.
not if they
You know,
have security
This is
left.
a debate I don't want to have.
Okay. I just want to
It's
make.
legal, and the question is,
You
what
put
is
it on
Bolton's
here
role?
that-
And you have
I'm just saying it's not,
you have a valid point, and that's, yeah, if that's the way you feel about it, I'm not changing your mind here today.
Just a question about the economics again, in terms of the benefit of the town. We haven't received from our maybe police department or any data regarding crime. And my question is, because there are all these controls and security, what it would mean in terms of hiring extra police? And I know you picked up on that at the beginning.
Right,
but we haven't seen any assessment from our police department, depending on the maximum number of farms we could have like that versus the minimum amount of farms. We don't know that yet, and what kind of estimate we would get for extra police, because if we make $20,000 or $50,000 with the tax benefit that we get a year, and I'm making up things, I haven't looked at the economics, but then we have to hire 2 or 3 EDs, special agents, whatever, for these type of operations, that would be like $150,000 that it would cost to the town. The same thing with, you know, we need
But it's so,
more
at the same
surveillance.
point, they're generating the money that's gonna pay for that person. If we gotta hire somebody to do that because you're gonna have that many growers in town, doesn't make sense. Here's the problem that we have. The big problem is you have to decide on supporting this, period, because we in the town voted it in. So figure out a way to accommodate it. That's what we need to do. Because we, the voters of this town, the majority of us said we want it legal. So we need to now step up and say, how do we make it so it works, so we're safe, so that we can do it properly.
The state made it legal, yes. But
We, in the town, we voted, the majority in our town.
We voted not for residential areas, and that was not the intent.
We voted it
Well,
legal.
we're voting on that in May. That's what we're voting on in May.
you
Right,
know?
okay.
So I think
So
we
the
should
question-
look at
I'm
it.
sorry, this question here.
Decision, right.
Right, so
So-
you have to make a decision in
Go
May
for it.
if we want a community.
Shout it out.
I have a question regarding the financial piece of it. It says up to 3%. Who determines if it's 3% or if it's 1% or?
The town, the selectmen would negotiate with the person who wants to have a business, whether it's cultivating or retail sales or manufacturing or whatever they want to do. You have to have the host community agreement. So, and the number has to be tied to the reasonable, the impact to the town. So, for example, if the town thought that it would be a good idea to do additional drug education or something along those lines, then, I mean, I'm offering up 3%. Anybody who's going to do this is offering up 3%.
And that's the maximum that the state regulated, right?
That-
That they said up to 3%.
Okay, I do want to I'm going to break this out a little bit. The host community agreement is for anybody who's running any kind of marijuana establishment, cultivation, retail sales, manufacturing. And that can be up to a 3% community impact fee. It's a specific term. The town of Bolton will also be voting in May on a 3% tax if we ever open up a retail shop. The town can charge an additional 3% on retail sales on top of that 3% community impact fee. But that's relegated to retail sales. It doesn't apply to cultivation and it doesn't apply to manufacturing.
And is that an individual agreement with each person that's in business?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and I have one other question out of curiosity. I read in places like California and Colorado, banks are reticent to do business because of federal regulations.
Right.
So this money, do you
Okay.
carry it in a wheelbarrow? And what happens?
I would love to have a wheelbarrow full of cash.
Right.
That's not the way that this is going to work. So there are banks who are doing business with marijuana establishments. There is cyber currency, which I don't know a ton about, but that is,
Not good.
but that's another issue. But there are banks that are doing business.
But they're not federally insured, right?
Some of them
Wait.
are. And also the state is currently trying to figure out a better way to make sure that there's better protection. This is not going to be a cash business for me. Anything that I buy or sell is not going to be in cash. It will be done through.
So there's a trail.
There is a trail. Yeah.
Who do you sell to? Is this retail sales or do you sell to distributors?
We would sell to other licensed marijuana establishments. So I would have flower that I would sell to retail shops that are licensed, that have gone through the same licensing process I've gone to. And then there's also trim, which is valuable for making various products, which I would sell to licensed manufacturers. Those are the two places that it would go.
So you wouldn't sell to retail? It's not
I would not be doing retail sales to customers, exactly right. I would be
Not allowed
selling to the
to.
retail stores themselves.
If the bylaw passes.
David?
Do you have any sense, since you've been spearheading this effort, like how many people are gonna raise their hand and jump into this business? Are we talking 30 residents in town?
One.
50?
One.
Okay, I just
Next
wanted to
year.
try to get some perspective on that,
Yeah.
okay?
If this bylaw passes, is the opportunity to grow available to anybody, or is there some restriction as to what is a farm?
So it's available to anybody who can get the state license.
Right. So you don't need to be an existing farm, you can just, as you claim to do in your basement?
Right.
Okay.
Does it have to be done indoors?
It doesn't. It could be done outdoors, but only if it would not be a nuisance to your neighbors in terms of being able to smell it. And there are the security requirements.
Good luck with the weather.
Which is different, yeah.
Good luck with the
And
weather.
I want to be clear about my view on outdoor cultivation, because when I drafted the bylaw, I did not draft it for just me. It's not tailored to exactly what I would want to do. If it was, it would be much narrower and we wouldn't be answering half of these questions. But there are other people in the town who might be interested, and I did have our farms in mind, thinking, as the times are changing and as there's less stigma, they really might like this income at some point in time. It might keep them sustainable. Growing outdoors, though, is tricky If you're limited to 1,000 square feet total, it's not 1,000 square feet inside and 1,000 square feet inside, it's just 1,000 square feet. If you're growing it outside, you're getting one harvest a year. That's a lot of money to put into the infrastructure that you need to do that for one harvest a year. Personally, I don't know how that would be financially sustainable.
There's a big infrastructure cost for growing outside.
Well, I mean,
Well, you have things that you can't control, weather you can't control, lighting.
Do you happen to know how high, is there any specification on the security fence? Because, you know, deer can jump 8 feet easily. And
Yeah.
if you wouldn't want to grow your.
There's nothing in the regulations that I've seen about the height for exterior fences.
It doesn't specify.
No.
Okay.
You guys realize that our orchards now require fencing? All of our orchards are fenced in,
But I don't think.
and that's required by the state.
Right, but I don't
Yes.
think with cameras, right?
No, but,
Orchards are?
but that's not an uncommon thing to have on a farm, is security cameras to make sure nobody's goofing around there, especially when you have big open spaces.
But we have an orchard next to us. I have a farmer next to me. I don't think we have fencing.
If you're a commercial orchard, you have a fence around your orchard. They do not allow dogs on orchards anymore.
No, not these. I didn't know.
Okay. Any other questions,
Yes, I have.
Sharon?
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make a point of kind of concession to people who are concerned, people who did not vote to legalize marijuana. I think that's, you know, that's a really legitimate position to take. But I think that if you didn't vote to legalize marijuana, you may not have voted to legalize alcohol. But we have alcohol sales in town. How do we talk to our children about that? We tell them either you don't use alcohol or you use it in moderation, and we talk to them about that. There's a real, you know, I think that people have made the point that I don't think that this kind of growth process is going to actually make your kids more likely to use pot. I think that as people have said, it's just as easy for kids to get alcohol. It's just as easy for kids, it's scary easy for kids to get pot or other drugs. We know that. So opioids are way worse and way more, you know, dangerous for this. My great nephew died of an overdose in the middle of his recovery at 23. I understand this, but this is really, it's like a small farm. It's unbelievably well regulated. It's going to be safe. It's not going to, this is going to happen, this is going to be grown all over the state because it's a good business. It's going to be a profitable business. This is a way for our neighbors who want to be able to earn a little extra money by working unbelievably hard, by investing a great deal up front to do this, to obey all these regulations. 2 houses down from me, folks moved in, built a new house, built a 3-story barn 50 feet from both corners, where they run a business. Things are going in and coming out of there all the time. But it's an acceptable thing in Bolton, right? Their barn was built where it was allowed to be built. It was built according to our standards. And we have a kind of small business allowance in town that allows people to do this. If you don't like marijuana, don't use it. Understand that this is not an illegal job. It's not an illegal process. And I'm trying to think of how to talk about What is beautiful about the fields around me?
My
is-
only rebuttal to that, look, I mean, if it was just the world of adults, I kind of would agree with you and I wouldn't have an issue, but, you know, the state made it legal and, sure, I'm very disappointed about that, but I understand that, in my view, marijuana just is not, certainly not beneficial for kids, for under 21. And I think if the state's gonna grow it and we're gonna grow it in town, it's gonna make it, whether kids use it more or not, obviously that's a different issue, but it's gonna make it more available, and I think that just by itself is gonna make it a lot easier for kids under 21 to
Okay,
use it, and
guys,
they're gonna.
I'm gonna take one
So-
question because I only have the room for another 3 minutes and I need to clean it up. Yeah,
I
one more
have I
question.
have one question, one comment. Just very quickly about the alcohol and marijuana. Alcohol is legal beyond the age of 21, marijuana is not federally. Okay, so that's one difference. But in the drug one.
Federal.
So do you have a question? Because this lady has a
But
question back
I'm
here.
just making a comment. In terms of questions, I have, the regulations talk about marijuana micro businesses and co-ops, and I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of this particular bylaw, how,
No, that's a great question.
allows this.
So this could technically be a micro business, but a micro business limited to 1,000 square feet because that's what the bylaw says.
So for micro business, that leads to my next question. It says here, and I'm reading the regulations, it says, a micro business that is a marijuana product manufacturer.
Yep, that doesn't apply
That
here
does not apply
because it's
because
limited, our bylaw is limited to cultivation,
But
not
it
manufacturing.
also says that the micro business is a co-located marijuana establishment that can either be a tier 1 marijuana cultivator and/or product manufacturer.
Right,
So-
but our bylaw says you're limited to cultivating, not manufacturing.
Bylaws
Okay, and with regard to the co-op question, and this is the last one I'm gonna answer, you guys can catch me afterwards.
Well,
With regard to the co-op, this is not our bylaw does not provide for a co-op. A co-op, the license is held by the co-op, and you can have multiple growing facilities all over the state under that license. This bylaw is not a co-op. All right, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.